Secretary Noem there wrapping up her remarks and questions with the press, most of whom centered on the ICE-involved shooting there in Minneapolis, Minnesota. That's on your screen right now. So on the screen, you see what has been protesters that have showed up at the ICE federal building there in Minneapolis, held back by a line of federal officers. Secretary Noem reminding us that law enforcement safety is paramount, reminding us that we need to investigate before jumping to conclusions, and reminding us of the hard work and the brave efforts of those men and women who put themselves in harm's way every day to protect American citizens and so much more. Hello, everyone. This is Outnumbered. I'm Emily Campagno, here with my co-host, Harris Faulkner, and also joining us today, Kennedy, host of Kennedy Saves the World podcast, Kaylee McGee-White, Fox News contributor, and Josh Ritter, Fox News contributor, criminal defense attorney, and co-host of the weekly Rap Sheet on Fox Nation. Now, Joshua, let's start with you on what we just heard. We're learning more about that deadly shooting in Minneapolis. Here's the exact moment that the ICE agent shot the woman. We want to warn you that this video is graphic. So, Joshua, that was one of the angles of the videos in that ICE-involved shooting. So Secretary Noem was taking a lot of questions from the press there. What stood out to you? What legal angles do you want to help flesh out for viewers right now?
I think the part that cannot be overstated enough is the idea that this is a weapon. I don't care if it's a vehicle. I don't care if it's a baseball bat, loaded gun, or knife. It's a weapon in the way that it's being used in this case and the way that we're seeing it be used here. It's important too, I know that we're trying to look through this and go through it second by second and in slow motion, but it's the events leading up to this that are important as well. She's using her vehicle to block police activity. That's a crime itself. They're allowed to investigate that. They're allowed to arrest her for that. They go to arrest her, and she prevents them from doing that. That's another crime. That creates a more volatile, more dangerous situation. And in the midst of that, when officers are surrounding her car, she is using her vehicle in that instance. This is how they are trained. To view a vehicle, just because it's a vehicle and not a handgun, you don't view it as any less deadly. And they're using a response of deadly force to protect their own lives. It is incredibly tragic, and I'm sure all of them would have liked to have avoided this, but it's important to understand that in the context how dangerous this situation was leading up to those crucial fractions of a second in which she used that vehicle as a weapon.
I want to stay with you for a moment, Joshua, as you help us with this legal analysis. This is how I see it. On camera, we watched as they ordered her out of her vehicle. Now, that means that that subject was not free to leave. That's a temporary investigative detention. That's a Fourth Amendment seizure. Without complying, she then fled. And we know that Supreme Court decisions have upheld the fact that there is a lawful justification for shooting when an officer reasonably believes he's in imminent fear of serious injury or bodily harm or death or that of bystanders. And we know that in the last 10 years, motor vehicles have accounted for almost a third of officer deaths in the line of duty, and it has skyrocketed in the last year alone. Now, you add on to that the fact that that road was icy. I spoke with multiple officers who talked about those adverse conditions and shared how dangerous the conditions were, how many of them have encountered, as they're on foot with a motor vehicle, dealing with things, the slipperiness. You cannot aim to control or expect to mitigate what danger a motor vehicle poses when someone is trying to flee. Now, we know that simply fleeing is not justification legally for a shooting, but when that fleeing is compounded by what I just stated in terms of the imminent threat and the like, then it certainly is. The totality of the circumstances the Supreme Court has held is what matters. And all of what we are discussing right now feeds into the fact that it seems pretty clear to me that the officer was indeed justified and indeed feared for his life, as we saw him limping afterward for those two steps, and the secretary has confirmed he was indeed hit by that vehicle.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's the totality of the circumstances, and it's under this lens of reasonableness. And was he behaving reasonably under the circumstances? And think about this, too. You talked about how often vehicles are used as a weapon. Well, she's already using that vehicle as a tool. She's using it to stop law enforcement from conducting their activities. She's using it to flee. He didn't fire his weapon, by the way. I want to make this point, because she was fleeing.
Correct.
He fired his weapon in response to her using her vehicle again as a tool in which to harm him, when she's driving at him, did in fact strike him. And it's when she's driving at him and he's trying to get out of the way that he felt in that moment, in those fractions of a second, that it was reasonable under the circumstances to use deadly force.
Kennedy, totality of the circumstances also includes the preceding events that go much further than just those split seconds in the full analysis. And there's rhetoric that especially Secretary Noem was, I believe it was our Brian Yennis that was asking her about, that has created a culture of absolute hatred, but attacks on ICE officers. We know that they've been subjected to an over 1,000% increase in assaults and threats and the like. So that, too, creates a heightened circumstance that it was, frankly, open season on federal agents.
Well, that's a problem here. I mean, I hate these chaotic political environments that we're in because it becomes an all or nothing proposition. You know, either you say this woman was a domestic terrorist and was out there trying to kill cops, or you say that she's an innocent victim who was murdered in cold blood. You know, if you slow down the video and if you look at it, it's somewhere in between. And that's what makes this tragic. Unfortunately, people like AOC and Jacob Fry and Tim Walz and, you know, so many of these progressives have been fomenting this environment. They have been stoking it because they want a tragedy. They want something like this to use as a trophy and as a distraction. And you can see that in their language. But, you know, unfortunately, I think this person was dumb, and I think she panicked, and I think she was trying to get out of there. And I think if there had been a split second more, I don't think that officer would have used deadly force. And I think it's a little bit murkier than Secretary Noem would like to present to the public. But unfortunately, you've got ICE agents who really feel their lives are in danger because it's more than 1,000%. It's a 1,300% increase in violence and lethal threats against them. So that's the environment that they're working in. But also, it is incumbent upon those officers to be even more responsible, given the microscope and the climate that we are in.
Which their hands are tied often, Kayleigh. Obviously, the support of the federal administration, but certainly the local and state officials have not made their lives easier. In fact, they have encouraged, again, fomented what has led to be violent resistance to these officers in an already most dangerous situation of executing warrants. I note that there are wanted posters. We didn't want to put it on the screen as a graphic. There are wanted posters up of that particular ICE agent and all of them with a anonymous tip line that you can call in if you have information to dox and put out these agents' identification. And we know that there are people, including like Governor Gavin Newsom, who have called for them, show us your identity, take off your mask, introducing legislation as such. But we know there is a tight nexus between identification and violence against these officers.
And I think this is part of the problem here is it doesn't really matter how many angles you show those on the left of this tragic incident. It doesn't matter what they actually see on camera, because the underlying belief of the left is that the interaction between the ICE officers and the protester was illegitimate in the first place. They don't believe that ICE has any right to be there in the neighborhoods. They don't believe that ICE has any right to apprehend or detain someone whose car was obstructing their enforcement of the law, who was impeding their movements. And this is a view that has been deliberately created by the left, in part through their sanctuary city policies. Essentially, they've communicated to their protesters that, well, local and state law enforcement don't have to work with ICE, so neither do you. That's not true. That's not what federal law states. These ICE officers do, in fact, have the right to apprehend people who are impeding their enforcement of the law. And we have lost that fact in this discussion.
Which we heard, to your point about jurisdiction, we heard Secretary Noem say, well, why, answering a question, why is the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension withdrawn? They don't have jurisdiction here. So no matter what Minnesota states, no matter what they try to impede, at the end of the day, here especially, and now with this investigation, that's federal.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more, I think it's deeper than that. No, they were not going to get accessibility to all of the scene and evidence and all of those things. I mean, that was made clear by the FBI, and the Minnesota, the state investigative arm, if you want to call it that, has withdrawn based on the fact that they didn't think that they would get as much as they needed to participate. They've also left the door open for re-entering that investigation at some point. So that'll be interesting. The bottom line, though, is that this is a sanctuary jurisdiction. And they've already laid down as part of the politics in that state that they don't want to be cooperative. So how do you investigate something but not be cooperative, but want the other side to give you everything you want? I mean, it just wasn't going to work out to begin with. But Emily, you and Kayleigh were just talking about something that I think really ties into what Kristi Noem shared yesterday, the Secretary of DHS. She said that the same agent who got hit by the car yesterday had already faced an incident. And I went through Minnesota, CBS, WCCO, my husband's old station, had a report several months ago about an agent who was dragged 300 feet while executing an arrest warrant on an illegal alien, resulting in 33 stitches. The governor then coming out and saying much of the same rhetoric that we're hearing now. If you're going to dox, it makes these situations really, really corruptible. Because you can't say now, you can't pretend, if this turns out to be the same agent, that he wasn't justifiable in fearing for his life because of what he'd been through. If it turns out to be the same person, and we don't want to aid in doxing by tying those together, Noem started that, and those people on the ground started that. They want to look at people's addresses and so on and so forth. I just think that it frustrates this case in terms of whether the same man is targeted again. It's more than weird. It's justifiable, of course. He's going to look at that and be a threat probably before any of us would. But maybe not. Maybe it's just a threat for all the reasons that you said, Josh, because it's a weapon, a car out of control, or at the hands of somebody who means to control it and put it on the body of somebody else.
If the team in control will just permit me, because this is such a great conversation, and I want to ask you, Joshua, based on Harris's point that she just made, in the reasonable officer standard that a jury, let's say, will take into account, would it come into account if that particular officer had this specific background? This is all hypothetical at this point. Or is the reasonable officer standard then limited to a reasonable officer in his shoes, not that particular history?
Correct. Not his subjective history, what his personal experiences, but what would a reasonable bystanding officer expect in that situation? But reasonable officers are aware of the idea that cars can be used as weapons. I mean, we have to imagine this. If somebody's running at you with a machete, is the same way that they're viewing this person operating this vehicle in that moment. And they're going to have to take measures, even if that's deadly force, to protect themselves or others.
Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.